Hi and welcome to part 4 of the Objective Secured review of the 2022 Codex Aeldari. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Psychic phase and the units that can utilise those powers within that Psychic phase. So if you want to check out parts 1, 2 and 3 that cover the Aspect Warriors, the Corsairs and the Inari, go and check them out in the playlist. Otherwise, let's start talking Psychics. The Aeldari have a number of Psychic casting users within the Codex available to them. And the most, I suppose, common and well-known is the Farseer. The Farseer probably epitomizes the Eldar Psyker better than anything else in the modern game. He has a movement of 7, a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, strength and toughness 3, 5 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 9, and a 6+ armor save, with a Shuriken pistol and a Witchblade as his standard weapons. The Shuriken pistol is a 12-inch pistol, 1 shot, strength 4, minus 1 AP and 1 damage with the Shuriken rule, which increases the AP to minus 3 on the wound roll of a 6. The Witchblade is a strength user, minus 1 AP, 2 damage weapon that always wounds on a 2+. Now this Witchblade can also be upgraded to a Singing Spear. The Singing Spear being a dual profile weapon. In melee, it is still a strength user. It's only AP 0 now, but it's flat 3 damage and still wounds on 2s. However, it also gets a shooting profile, which is an assault 1, strength 9, 0 AP, 3 damage attack. I think that the 3 damage alone means that you are highly likely to see Farseers, Warlocks, pretty much anyone who can take a Witchblade upgrading to that Singing Spear. In terms of his abilities, he comes with Battle Focus and Strands of Fate, which is pretty standard for most of the Craft World units. He has a 4+ invulnerable save thanks to his rune armor. His Ghost Helm, unlike previous editions, now simply means he never suffers perils of the warp. Now this is a deviation from past editions, when it used to give him an invulnerable saving throw against the mortal wounds he would suffer, and then prior to that there were different versions of the Ghost Helm. The runes of the Farsi have also been changed. Now that when you are rolling for the Strands of Fate at the start of each battle round, you can re-roll one of those dice if your Farseer is not in engagement range of enemy units. That little benefit is quite significant, having now played several games with Strands of Fate. The ability to manipulate those dice and to try and get yourselves the results that you critically need can't be underestimated. The Farseer can manifest 2 psychic powers in the Psychic phase and attempt to deny 2 psychic powers in the Psychic phase. He knows Smite and 2 psychic powers from the Runes of Fortune and or Runes of Fate disciplines. He has the Eldari, Asayani and Craft World faction keywords, as well as Character, Infantry, Psyker and Farseer for his standard keywords. It's really important to note that he can mix and match between Runes of Fortune and Runes of Fate, and I feel like the Runes of Fate will be used quite regularly, but the Runes of Fortune probably less so. Moving on from the Farseer, we have his Skyrunner counterpart. The main difference, of course, is that he goes up to a movement of 16, his toughness goes up to 4, and his wounds go up to 6, but otherwise his profile remains the same. Obviously, he does gain access to a twin Shuriken catapult mounted on the bike, which is an 18-inch, assault 4, strength 4, minus 1 AP, 1 damage Shuriken weapon. He retains all the other rules and abilities, his psychic rules, everything as a standard Farseer. However, he also picks up Ride the Wind, which means that instead of making an advance roll, he always advances 6. He obviously has a slight change in his keywords as well, picking up Fly and Biker instead of Infantry, but also Farseer Skyrunner as a separate keyword to Farseer. This does mean that any rules that trigger on a Farseer through stratagems or the Warlock rules also trigger on the Farseer Skyrunner. There can be no discussion about Farseers without talking about the epitome of Farseers, Eldrad Ulthran. Eldrad's profile is an interesting one because it's better than a Farseer, but it's also parts of it that feel recognisable from the Skyrunner. He still moves 7 inches and a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, strength 3, but toughness 4 and 6 wounds with 3 attacks on foot. Leadership 9 and a 6+ armor save. He is equipped with a Shuriken pistol, the Staff of Ulthamar, and a Witchblade. Now, what they've done, the Shuriken pistol remains the same, however the Staff and Witchblade have been combined into a single melee profile. It is a strength +2, minus 2 AP, 2 damage weapon that an unmodified win roll of 2+ is always successful. I'm not quite sure what the +2 strength modifier will be used for, given that it always wounds on 2s. So I'm not quite sure why that sits there as a +2. I'm sure there'll be a niche instance I can probably come up with where you turn off special rules or weapon rules and you have to rely on the strength of the weapon. But I think that's largely a superfluous addition. In his abilities, he keeps Battle Focus, Strands of Fate, the Ghost Helm, the Runes of the Farseer. However, he picks up 2 new rules. First of Ulthway, which means that each time a Psychic test is taken for this model, you can reroll that test, which makes him much more reliable to cast because he has built-in rerolls. Also, his armor, instead of being Rune Armor, is now the Armor of Last Runes. It has a 4+ invulnerable save, but also can only be wounded on an unmodified 4+. So an unmodified wound roll of 1 to 3 always fails. So he basically has inbuilt transhuman. He can attempt to manifest 3 psychic powers and deny 2, and he knows Smite and 3 psychic powers from Fortune or Fate. Obviously, his keywords change from Craftword to Ulthway specifically, and he keeps the Farseer keyword again so that he can trigger different stratagems with the Farseer keyword. When we talk about these 3, I know a lot of people consider the Farseers to be a staple of the Eldar army. However, as we'll see when we start talking about the psychic powers, a lot of them are very limited and have changed now so that they only affect core. So I can definitely see Eldar armies that don't utilize core as heavily as some other armies might avoid taking a Farseer for the cost. We do have one other HQ choice that is a Psyker, which is the Spirit Seer. The best descriptor of a Spirit Seer is it's almost a pair of Warlocks rolled into one. He has a movement of 7, a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, a strength and toughness of 3, 4 wounds, 2 attacks, a leadership 8, and a 6+ save. He comes with a Shuriken Pistol and a Witch Staff. The Witch Staff is a strength user, -1 AP, D3 damage, and always wounds on a 2+. He comes with the standard Battle Focus and Strands of Fate, as well as Rune Armor for a 4+ invulnerable save. His extra rule is called Spirit Mark, which is an aura. While friendly Craftworld Spirit Host core unit is within 6 of this model, each time that makes an attack, it can reroll wound rolls of 1. As a Psyker, this model can attempt to manifest 1 psychic power in your psychic phase, and attempt to deny 1. It knows Smite and 1 from the Runes of Battle, or the Runes of Fortune Discipline. His faction keywords are Aeldari, Asayani, Spirit Host, and Craftworld, while also picking up Character, Infantry, Psyker, and Spirit Seer for his standard keywords. This is a HQ choice that essentially gives you access to Runes of Battle without having to take Warlocks. He's obviously very useful when you include him alongside Wraith constructs, which is where the Spirit Host keyword and the Spirit Host core rule for his Spirit Mark ability really play up. However, I've used him in the past without those units, simply to gain an extra Rune of Battle in the army where I haven't had the space for Warlocks. Speaking of Warlocks, we're going to move straight into the elite choices now. First choice are the Warlocks. They are a unit of 1 to 6, with a movement of 7, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness 3, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8, and a 6+ save. Every model in the unit starts with a Shuriken Pistol and a Witchblade, which we've already talked about, and they mirror the profiles on the Farseer. Exactly like their Farseers, they can also swap their Witchblades for Singing Spears in exactly the same way the Farseer can. They have Strands of Fate and Battle Focus, as well as Rune Armor unit-wide. What makes them interesting is the Conclave rule. If you choose to take a unit of 1, the unit gains the character keyword, so you can still take a solo Warlock. You also have the Seer Council rule, which says if your army is Battleforged, for each Farseer keyword model in a detachment, you can include 1 Warlocks unit in the detachment without taking up a battlefield slot. So this is how you obviously get extra elite choices with your Warlocks. This unit can also attempt to manifest 1 psychic power and deny 1 psychic power. It knows Smite and 1 psychic power from the Runes of Battle Discipline. If the unit has a starting strength of 4 or more, it knows 1 additional psychic power, and while this unit contains 4 or more, it can attempt to manifest 1 additional psychic power. So you really end up in a situation with the Warlocks where I feel you'll definitely see solo Warlocks wandering around. Now, there is a points increase if you do take a solo Warlock. It's not quite double, but it's close. Or you will see units of 5. 6 tips them over on the blast rules, and I think that 6 is potentially a risk. However, 5 feels like a really good number to have them supporting the Farseer. There's also a stratagem that means that the targeting the Farseer becomes very difficult. And they're relatively cheap. I think it's 125 points for 5 of these without upgrades. There is also the Warlocks Skyrunner unit, which is a unit size of 1 to 3, a movement of 16, a toughness of 4 and 3 wounds each, but otherwise they're the same as their foot counterparts. However, they do have a saving throw of 4+ as well, which is an armor save. So if they do lose their invulnerable, they do actually have an armor save to fall back on. Again, they come with shuriken pistols, witchblades, and twin shuriken catapults on the bikes, and have the same option to replace their witchblade with a singing spear. Much like the foot unit, they have battle focus, strands of fate, rune armor, warlock conclave, and seer council, but also pick up ride the wind, which means they will always advance 6. This unit starts casting 1 and denying 1, and if it has a starting strength of 3, it knows an extra power and can cast an extra power each turn. And again, if they're a solo model, then they gain the character keyword and their points cost goes up. I think with this particular unit, you will be, again, in a situation where it will either be 1 or 3. I don't really see a reason to just take 2. The solo Warlock moving around the table, being able to cast Protect or Jinx, Quicken, any of those runes of battle abilities in a very mobile manner is a really positive thing. And the unit of 3 obviously has its own ability to threaten certain units and protect the Farseer. The last psyker that a lot of people overlook when it comes to Craftworld is the Hemlock Wraith Fighter. The Wraith Fighter is unique in that it is an aircraft that is a psyker. It starts with 12 wounds and then degrades at 3 wounds remaining, and again when it's got a solo wound remaining. It moves a minimum of 20 in any bracket, however it moves up to 60 inches in its top bracket, 40 in its second bracket, and 25 in its third bracket. In all cases, it has a weapon skill of 6+, its ballistic skill is 3+, which degrades to 5+ at its bottom bracket. Strength and toughness of 6, 3 attacks, D3 attacks or 1 attack from its top bracket down, leadership of 8 and a 3+ armor save, and it comes with 2 heavy D-sides and a Mind Shock pod. The heavy D-scythe has changed in this edition. It used to be an auto-hitting weapon, much like a flamer. Now, but it was only D3 shots. Now it is an 18-inch range heavy D6, strength 12, neg 4 AP 2 damage, blast weapon. Each time an attack is made with this weapon, an unmodified wound roll of 6 inflicts a mortal wound in addition to normal damage. The Mind Shock pod is an aura. While an enemy unit is within 12 of any models equipped with a Mind Shock pod, subtract 2 from their leadership characteristic. The model then has a group of rules that are both familiar and unfamiliar. Strands of Fate, again, is one that we've seen across most of these units. Supersonic is a pretty standard rule that most aircraft have, where they can turn up to 90 degrees before they move, and then they move straight forwards and they cannot pivot again. They have Airborne, which means that you cannot declare a charge with this model, and it can only be charged by units that have Fly. You can ignore its base and move through its engagement range, and so on. It can also explode when it's destroyed, and it is -1 to hit thanks to its hard to hit rule. It also has the Wraithbone form, which is a -1 to the damage characteristic of attacks that are allocated against this model, making it that little bit more durable. This model can attempt to manifest 1 psychic power in your psychic phase and deny 1 psychic power in your psychic phase. It knows Smite and 1 psychic power from Runes of Battle. When it attempts to manifest, it can only select the second effect, which is the quote-unquote negative effect, as in it can only target enemy units with those. They're mostly maledictions. The reverse of Protect being Jinx, for example. The Hemlock is pricey at over 200 points. However, it does have a pretty decent pair of heavy weapons, and its ability to apply those debuff powers anywhere on the table early in the game can't be understated. I suppose my biggest disappointment with the Hemlock lies in the fact that it has lost its ability to turn again from the Wings of Cain rule, which is no longer on the datasheet. And now with a degrading profile, those heavy D-sides obviously become less efficient as it takes damage. That being said, the wound brackets are pretty considerate, where you don't really feel the effects until you're down to only 3 wounds out of your starting 12. So, with all of those in mind, we've now covered the psykers for the craft worlds. So let's talk about their powers. We have 3 psychic power charts to talk about. We'll start with Runes of Battle, which is common to the Warlocks, the Spirit Seer, and the Hemlock Wraith Fighter. The first power is Conceal Reveal. The first version of it is an 18-inch blessing, which gives light cover, whereas the Malediction version selects an enemy unit within 18 and removes cover. It's a pretty straightforward power, and it's okay. Embolden Horrify is the second one. Embolden means that you select a core or character model within 18, and you add 2 to their leadership, and they can fight first in the fight phase. The addition for the fight first is really important, because it does mean that you can end up in a situation where a unit that you thought would be lost because by the time you got to fight with them they'd be dead, now gets an opportunity to potentially swing. And I think that a lot of the powers have been tweaked to give you more reason to take some of these extra powers. The Reverse Horrify selects 1 enemy unit within 18 and subtracts 2 from their leadership, and they must fight last. Now, I think Horrify pairs really well with the Hemlock Wraith Fighter for obvious reasons. You've now got a -4 to leadership, so you can pick an enemy unit, dump its leadership, shoot it with the heavy D-sides, and then hopefully have them fail morale. The third power is called Enhanced Drain. It's a blessing with an 18-inch unit, 18-inch range of the caster, and you add 1 to the melee attack hit roll. The Malediction version, which is Drain, is -1 to the attack rolls for an enemy unit within 18. The most famous of these powers is Protect Jinx, coming in at number 4. It is a blessing with a range of 18, which improves the save characteristic by 1 to a maximum of 2+. The reverse version worsens the save characteristic of an enemy unit within 18 by 1 to a maximum of 6+. So this actually changes their save characteristic now, which means it does not affect invulnerable saves in either version. I think Protect and Jinx is probably better than Conceal Reveal. And I would always take Protect Jinx before Conceal Reveal, mainly because Protect Jinx does exactly the same thing, essentially, unless you have a 2-up save. And most of the Eldar army, apart from the Phoenix Lords, who aren't eligible to be targeted because they don't have the core keyword, there's no benefit for Protect for them. Whereas Jinx will obviously remove a point of saving throw, which is the same thing that stripping light cover does. Quicken Restrain is number 5. The first version of this allows them to pick a core or character unit within 18, and they can immediately make a normal move, advance, or fallback as if it was the movement phase. If it does so, the unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge this turn. So this is a way of obviously double moving. However, the limits on it are pretty severe. And I think that the fact you can't shoot or declare a charge makes it a late game power at best. Restrain, on the other hand, is an 18-inch malediction that halves the move characteristic from enemy models, and those models cannot perform actions. If they're performing an action, it immediately fails. I think that component of the power is pretty significant. You also have situations where you can obviously halve a move characteristic and then force them to move through craters and difficult terrain, and that makes them even slower. I think Quicken Restrain has a lot of opportunity there, mainly from Restrain, and it's another power I can feel you would get a lot of value out on a Hemlock Wraith Fighter. The last power is Empower or Innovate. Empower selects a friendly core unit within 18, and you add 1 to wound rolls in melee. The Innovate Malediction version selects an enemy unit and subtracts 1 from their attack rolls in melee. So all 6 of those powers have dual effects. We're told that when you use Rune of Battle, you first nominate to use the power, roll its warp charge value, and if manifested, you select one of the following effects. So you select either Protect or Jinx, for example. It does mean that someone else can cast the same power, but they can only use whichever one you didn't already attempt. Moving on, we're going to talk now about Runes of Fortune. Runes of Fortune was introduced in the tail end of 8th edition as part of the Blood of the Phoenix and Phoenix Rising campaign books. It added 6 new psychic powers for us. These are now basically limited to the Farseers, though. The first one is Fateful Divergence, which is a blessing with a warp charge value of 6, and if you successfully manifest it, you gain 1 command point. I think Fateful Divergence is one that you'll see a lot of in armies if you're taking a psychic powers. The ability to just give yourself a command point every turn can't be underestimated. It's also a great one to put in Corsair Void Scarred if you're running them, because a lot of these abilities that you could give to the Void Scarred don't work on them because they don't have the right keywords. Witch Strike is another unit, sort of buff one. It's a warp charge value of 5, and you select one model in the unit. And it does actually say that if you select a Corsair unit, then you must be selecting the caster. Until the start of your next psychic phase, each time this model makes a melee attack, if it successfully wounds, it inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target, and the attack sequence ends. Now that's really quite an interesting power, because it does give you just 3 mortal wounds off someone like Eldrad if he wants to cast it on himself, because he does hit on 2s with 3 attacks. So, and because he's obviously hitting on 2s and his weapon wounds on 2s, then you can obviously, if you really need those mortal wounds, you can get it, but I think you won't see too much of Witch Strike. Ghost Walk is the third one with a warp charge value of 5 and the requirements on core or character within 12, and you add 2 to their charge rolls made for the unit until the start of your next psychic phase. Ghost Walk is a really common ability you'll see for units that are deep striking, particularly if you've already got a 6 up your sleeve from the Strands of Fate. You can deep strike down, requiring a 9-inch charge. Know you've already got a 6, cast Ghost Walk on them for a +2, which means you can't fail that charge. You always roll the 1, so you can't fail that charge. And I think that's something you'll see quite commonly used for certain units, particularly out of a Falcon, which we'll talk about in a future episode. Power 4 is Crushing Orb. This is a modified Witchfire power, unlike Smite. This allows you to pick an enemy unit within 18 invisible. However, instead of just doing D3 mortal wounds, you roll 3d6, adding 2 if the enemy unit is a monster or a vehicle. Or it contains 6 or more units, and for each 4+, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So it gives you a bit more targeting opportunity with the power. And obviously, if you're targeting a vehicle or a monster, the ability to guarantee yourself 3 mortal wounds is much higher. But I don't think we'll see it too often outside of those very heavy psychic builds. Focus Will is power number 5, which is a blessing with a warp charge value of 6, selecting 1 friendly Asuryani Psyker within 24, and you add 2 to the psychic tests to deny the witch tests for that unit until the start of your next psychic phase. This can be a great one when combined with Ulthway, with Eldrad, with the ability to stack modifiers and reroll dice, getting off super smites, or more importantly, getting off the runes of fate powers at their maximum cast range. I suspect Focus Will again works in those sort of psychic heavy armies where you're building for it with Ulthway. The last power is Impair Senses. It's a malediction with a range of 18 invisible to the Psyker, and until the start of your next psychic phase, that unit cannot be affected by auras from your opponent's army. That could be really important for some armies that rely on that sort of, layering the hit rerolls and the wound rerolls and modifiers to hit and wound. But again, I think it's so niche that you're not going to use it in casual or competitive play. It'll be something that you pull out when you know your opponent's going to be coming with something like that. So of those 6 powers, I think you'll see a lot of Fateful Divergence and Ghost Walk. I think Focus Will has a place in some builds, and I think Witch Strike, Crushing Orb, and Impair Senses will only show up very rarely. Moving on to our classic psychic powers, the Runes of Fate, we have 6 powers, all of which remain the same names from previous editions. We start with Guide. Now, Guide has been changed so that it is now in a range of 18, and it only affects core and character models within 18. However, if you roll a psychic test of 10 or more, you can select them within 24. It still allows you to reroll hit rolls, but the requirement to roll a 10 or higher obviously forces you into a different playstyle, potentially with your casters, depending on how far away they are. Doom, which is probably the most hated psychic power for most opponents of the craft world, has a warp charge value of 7 and a range of 18 now instead of 24. It also only affects core and characters now, and again, the psychic test being 10 or more means you have a 24-inch range. This is actually I suppose, a nerf to the psychic power Doom, in that now it does not affect things like fire prisms or Falcon grav tanks, and the range has been dropped to 18 inches, meaning it's a lot more risky for the psyker to try and get in range for that key assault with with certain weapons, or an 18-inch range unfortunately means that you are putting yourself in harm's way. Fortune is number 3, and really good with certain builds. It allows you to select a core or character unit within 18, and it gives them what is essentially a 5+ feel no pain, or 5+ ignore wounds. And again, if you roll a 10 or higher off your psychic test, you can select a unit within 24. Now, Fortune's always been a power that you see stacked for certain units. The fact that it is still core and character means you're not doing it to, again, things like the grav tanks, but it does, however, work on the Avatar of Cain, it does work on the Phoenix Lords, and it can make those units remarkably durable. Power number 4 is Executioner. It's one of my personal favourites. You manifest at a warp charge value of 7 and select one enemy unit, excluding characters with a wounds characteristic of 9 or less, within 18 of this psyker. That enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. If any enemy models are destroyed, you take an additional D3 mortal wounds. And again, if you have a psychic test of 10 or higher, it's a 24-inch range instead of 18. What this means is, if you've timed this well, is you can often peel off 4 or 5 mortal wounds from a unit simply by ensuring that whatever you target with it kills something, and you get that extra D3 off the back. It can be really useful when you've got something that's on 1 wound left to kill it, and then hopefully either hurt or kill something else. I think a jet bike is, obviously a given if you're taking Executioner. Will of Assyrian is number 5, and it's another power, much like things like Embolden and Horrify, that have been buffed to give it a much more appealing choice. And again, I think you'll see a lot of this now. It selects a core or craft horde unit within 18, core or character unit within 18 with a warp charge value of 6. That unit gains the objective secured ability. It automatically passes morale test, and it can still make attacks with ranged weapons without actions failing. Now, if the test was 8 or more, not 10, you can actually select within 24 of the psyker instead of 18. I think this power is arguably the best power in the entire group of powers for Runes of Fate. Giving something the obsec ability when it really needs it is amazing. Automatically passing morale is great, and the fact you can continue to perform an action and make attacks while shooting means that the Eldar's low unit count infantry can still function in both capacities. I would expect a lot of the Will of the Assyrian power being used. The last power is Mind War. Now this has very much changed year on year. It has a warp charge value of 7, and you select an enemy character unit within 18 and roll 1 dice and add this psyker's leadership to your result of your roll. Your opponent then rolls 1 dice and adds their leadership from the character to their roll. If your total is greater than your opponent's, the enemy suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the difference. And if the result is 10 or more on the psychic test, you roll 2d3 instead of 1 dice and add the result of your characteristic to the psyker. This one is I think it's probably the weakest of the 6 powers for Runes of Fate, and I think it's the most niche. It relies on, obviously, leadership 8 and 9 Farseers, or at least 9 for Eldrad. It sort of requires a lot of you, and the Farsiers are indeed 9. So you're rolling 9 plus a d6, target enemy character with an 8 or a 9, and whatever your difference is, you're dealing damage. You will have those rare instances where, if you can line it up right, have Horrify active on something plus the Mind Shock pod for another -2, you might have a character you can force down to leadership 4 or 3. They roll a dice and roll a 1. You roll, your d6 and get a 6, and all of a sudden they take a, 5+ mortal wounds and die on the spot. But I don't think you can rely on that. I feel like this is one of those stars align powers where you have to have everything just right, and then it works and it's amazing. Otherwise, it's going to be, if you're lucky, 1 or 2 wounds a turn, and that's probably it. with its warp charge value and range, I feel like you're almost better off just with Smite instead of Mind War. So that covers the psychic powers and the units that cast them for the Craftworld component of the Eldar Codex. If you want to learn more about the Corsairs, we talk about them and the Inari psychic powers in their separate videos, episodes 2 and 3 of the series. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below. Next episode, we'll be looking at the Wraith constructs within the book. But until next time, we hope you enjoyed listening, and we'll see you again soon.